Hi there, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Dwight Patterson. I've been helping health plans improve their quality performance for many years, focused on HEDIS, STARS, Medicaid, Medicare, you name it. So happy to be here. And this is our 5th session of 5 series. And I'll turn it over to Cynthia to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Cynthia Pauley Martin. I am a nurse by trade, have been working as a clinician with star ratings, both at the health plan and now consulting and helping plans all over the country with their star ratings. So happy to join Dwight today.
Awesome. Thanks. So today we're going to talk about cut points, one of the favorite topics of STARS people, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. It's 30 minutes. Trying to get the slides here. So this is part 5 of a 5-part series, summer learning series we've had for the last 5 weeks. Sorry to say that it's ending for the series for now. We can do stuff in the future. There are full recordings of every session on YouTube at QPA Advantage. And if you missed it, we talked about readmissions, case mix adjustment of caps, scoring of stars, EHO for all. It's been a wild month, so hopefully you'll check those out. I think they're really helpful for you. Today, our objective is to talk about cut points, but really hone into how they're calculated, what considerations you might have, as well as what goal setting considerations you might have so you can better improve your stars. So Cynthia.
Okay, so yeah, star ratings are getting harder. So looking here at the history of the last 10 years of star performance, you notice a steady increase in the average of star ratings and 4-star plans, the number of stars that are plans that are 4 stars, until we bump up against that 2022 bump, which was related to the COVID policies, and that resulted in a whopping 68% of plans being 4 or more stars. So, but with the methodological changes that are implemented the last couple of years, now for 2025, only 40% of the plans are 4 or more stars. There's only 7 plans this last time that were 5 stars compared to 74 and 22. And then more than a third of the plans in 24 and 25 lost at least a half a star rating. So why is this happening? So CMS has made changes to the measures, to the weights, to the implementation of 2 key outlier deletion, which we'll discuss later. We've got plans returning to their pre-COVID performance, increased competition between plans, and now next year the reward factor is going to be replaced by EHO for all, which some plans may not even qualify for.
Yep. So we're projecting this year drops in star ratings for 4.5 and 5-star plans from last year, and then next year it would be even a little tougher. So we're trying to hope plans sort of lift that up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how cut points are calculated. And first and foremost, you don't need to be a statistician to understand all of this, but you also really just want to understand the concept so that you can then better adjust expectations and goals. So they don't use national percentiles, which is the classic thing everybody talks about. Like, I'm in the top 10% of health plans. I'm in the 50th percentile. Those are even distributions of performance based on ranking of health plans. Cut points for stars are actually based on statistical clustering. So what it does is the math of that, they look for breaks, natural breaks in the data and or how results group together. So like sort of similar performance levels are grouped. So when you see a big dip in results, there might be a cut point there. The reason that's important to understand is it creates more variability in cut points and less predictability, because the more you add 3 more health plans in the reporting structure, the scores will adjust because just a few differences in members' performance in the middle changes the 3- and 4-star weighted measures because the calculation of this. One thing to note is the Part D plan, the MAPD plans have different star cut points than the PD only plans, the prescription drug plans, and so that they're like comparable. But otherwise, all the plans under MAPD, whether you have SNP, no SNP, etc., are all compared the same. Again, this is using statistical clustering. They take all the plan's data, that report that year, and it's based on how you perform and they perform every year that year. So it is not a prior year performance is actually irrelevant. So as plans improve, or if there's a market challenge across the board, like less flu shots, they've changed the measurement calculations. They look at the performance and they rank, in essence, by 5 points, 5 stars. It's like getting a grade, like A, B, C, and they're in whole numbers. So you cannot get a 4.5 star or 4.256 star. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and then that's calculated into your scoring. One of the things they're doing is they're creating a stability factor. So they added guardrails to how they calculate that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. They also are removing extreme outliers. Cynthia's going to talk about Tukey just a minute. And they also do statistical testings like mean resampling, which you don't really need to understand. In the back end, they're doing more multiple calculations on variation so that they can then put it together and have a more stable result. And the feedback was, well, this is due to create more stability in the cut point predictions and expectations for performance. Here's just a visualization of one measure and how it moves. Cut points can go up, they can go down. It depends on how the market did that year. It also depends on who's reporting. So if you have 20 new plans reporting, and if you look at how many plans are new and how the contracts that are getting put in, or contracts that leave the market completely, I know a 5-star plan that's already closed their plan for next year. So the shift in who's reporting when, will change the range of scores and change the clustering and change cut points. So yeah, variability happens. They go up, they go down, but mostly if you look over the multiple years, the positive trend of performance goes up because plans are all working towards the same thing. I got to do well, so I got to improve it. So they're driven to improve, which then provides better scores. But we'll talk about that variability as we go. One thing to note, CAPS is a different calculation. We're not going to explain it much today. I did a little bit of explanation in the case mix adjustment. CAPS is based on how well your plan is doing compared to the national average, and then they do statistical tests about how far and what direction you are based on the average. They call them cut points, but that's only part of the calculation. If you could meet a threshold for CAPS, like a 5-star threshold, but because if you're statistically not in the range, you could actually be a 4-star. And so it's very important to understand CAPS separately. We're not talking about cut points for CAPS. That's a different mathematical formula that we want to be interested in. Lead us into Tukey, Cynthia.
Okay, let's talk about Tukey. I want to keep saying, let's not talk about Bruno. So Tukey outlier deletion was implemented in 2023 in order to identify and remove the extreme performance scores so that the cut points are not being extremely swayed by either very low or very high numbers. Tukey is supposed to increase the stability and decrease the variability of the cut points. So the next slide. So here's the view of what people normally expect to see. This is a normal distribution of score curve with the outliers that are typically at the top end and the bottom end of the bell curve, excuse me. With Tukey, those are removed. Looking at the next slide. And that directional shift can be seen on both sides, so it centralizes the results into how the majority of plans perform. Next slide. So looking at this example, what we are seeing is that with the star measures, the distribution of performance tends to be on the high end scale for a lot of the measures. Because of that, the outliers, whether it's 1 outlier or 2 outliers, 3 outliers, 10, that are more on the low performance side. So the shift seems to be in the upward direction. For using this example, you can see the low 16% cut point. Maybe that's a 2-star cut point here, removed by Tukey, and that moves that 2-star cut point up to from 16 to 37%, a huge jump. Now, there have been some measures where the outliers are removed on the high end, but it seems to be occurring more often on the low end. Okay, next slide. So I love this visual. It's a real world example of how Tukey has impacted the cut points. So we want to make sure we understand that this slide shows the cut point movement, but it does not have the guardrails applied. So you can see here for the hemoglobin A1C measure how Tukey affected the cut points over time. Some of the lift is of improved performance or plans that are, returning to normality after COVID. But what's most important to look at is that the 2-star cut point moving from 2023 at 39%, then jumps up to a 58%, then up to a 69%. 30 percentage points in 2 years with the Tukey added. And also looking at, if you have a plan that's saying starting at 75% and they stay there, but then over the years, if they can't improve, that 75% might have been a 4-star, and then within 2 years, it's dropped to a 2-star with the help of Tukey.
Yeah. Tukey was implemented to create stability, which is the idea that they take out extreme scores, then your calculations will be similar each year or more similar each year and not be driven by extreme scores. But it was also a financial implication because they knew in simulations that this would raise thresholds and lower star rate. It was definitely a benefit for CMS to implement if they want to save money on this Medicare program, and that's part of why it was implemented.
Thank you, Dwight.
At the same time, guardrails were added the year before Tukey, and guardrails were added for the same stated reason, which was to create stability in projected cut points and the like. So historically, measures cut points have not changed dramatically each year, except for potentially new measures. And what they did was they said, okay, we're not going to allow cut points to move more than 5 points plus or minus from the prior year. So it was nice. It was like, oh, great, we're going to control the risk of that. Like if something uncontrollably changes, work towards a goal that I don't know about. In reality, most measures weren't really helped by cut points. If you look at cut points over trends, actually stated that new measures have no guardrails for the first 3 years, and we'll show an example later of what that implication is. But cut points were used during Tukey to actually slow the impact of Tukey on, I say Tukey, but Tukey outlier deletion, whatever, on the scores. So all the pain we're feeling from Tukey cut point, adjustments to the cut points based on Tukey outlier deletion have been slowed by guardrails. And the reason I bring this up is because when you're looking at prior cut points and you're predicting your performance, you need to know where those guardrails were applied and where they were not. And so if it's limited and a change by 5%, you can now expect that change to happen again. And I'll note that you can see in the tech notes every year at the back in the addendums of the tech notes, they actually present the cut points calculated without guardrails. So you can see that with guardrails and without guardrails, actually anyone can see it. It's in the tech notes from CMS when they publish the data. Here's an example of an extreme case where call monitoring for Part C, a very painful measure right now because plans were like, oh my God, I have to be at 100% to be a 5-star. That's crazy. And so they're struggling to keep their points when it was a higher weighted measure. On the left-hand side, you see cut points for 2-star at 46%, 69% for 3-star. You'll note that they only moved 5 points from the prior year. And that's because the guardrail controlled the implication of Tukey up to only 5 points. If you look on the right side, look at where the bar graph would, the cut points would be if you applied no guardrails and applied Tukey fully. And so insanely, but to know 22 and 23, they gave us a simulation of stars. So that's what that data is based on. 24 and 25 were actually applied Tukey outlier deletion in the cut points. And in the back of the tech notes, we found those without guardrails. So what you'll note is a 2-star last year in 2025, stars 2025 was a 46%. So if your score was 50, you're a 2-star. Now, if the guardrails were applied, 89% would be a 2-star. Insanely different, right? So there are measures really seriously taken into place. Sometimes it's not that many. One in mammogram, one in the others call monitoring. But what you want to take into case is now we can expect that the cut points for those measures like this, they'll go up another 5 points for 2-star, 3-star. And what we're talking about this, what's important is understanding the methodology of all this allows you to do better predictions and expectations of like where my score today is. If I just look at last year's cut points, I'm misinterpreting where I'm standing and what my performance expectations are. And this is what's critical. We have to go to our executives and we have to project how we're doing. And this kind of evaluation is really important to understand. So let's talk about predicting the future. If I had a ability to tell the future, I'd be a very wealthy man. I'd pick my stocks. I'd know what's happening in the future. I could focus on what my targets and goals are, but we don't. So when we talk about cut points and a lot of the things in stars, we have to predict how our competitors are doing, where we think the market is, what we think changes will happen, and nobody's perfect. But I want to make a point is that we can't ignore it. We can't just use old cut points or not take it seriously, because we have to make business decisions that are appropriate. We need to be risk averse, not make poor decisions, but also judge what strategic initiatives we have, how much investment we have. This is financial decisions that affect the company. So I have to say, it's like we can't tell the future, but we can look at our cut points. We can use an understanding of the market, understanding of what's happening in healthcare, data from our vendors and clients, and et cetera, to better understand what we would set as goals and targets, so our projections, our assessments of measure performance are more attuned to where we think they'll be in the future. We're not going to be perfect. We cannot let the worry about being perfect and, oh, I got the cut point exactly on the point to be the rule. But knowing this variability, knowing that we're not perfect predictors, we have to add better room or flexibility to our analysis to then adjust for the fact that you're not going to be perfect. So you can't go and say, okay, it's going to be 85 next year, and I got an 85, I met that star level. It might be 86, and you might have missed it by 1 point. Or it could be way low and say, oh, I didn't expect to get a 4, I was expecting to get a 3, right? So that's fine, but globally, we need to put enough room in our analytics, and we'll talk a little bit about goal setting, so that you can better set goals with targets. But yeah, we're not great at predictions. The worst thing is, because in the last few years, we feel like we're even worse at predictions. COVID took place, all the cut points went down, and then every year they are dramatically increasing because as members get better access to care, services come back into play, you name it, services are going up and cut points are going up. And then you talk about Tukey, you saw the implication on some of these things, like that had major changes to the cut points. That is a one-time, after guardrails are applied, generally a one-time effect. Then once it's effect, you're at a new level and you have to sustain that level so that you make sure you don't lose that. And then I use the stock market analogy, like nobody can predict the stock market, but we have to use analytics to better understand how to manage our money. The same in business. We need to do better strategic planning. We need to use better advice. And we need to understand what level of uncertainty we have in that thing. So I'm going to talk about a few measures and then see what, we'll go into that. So here are cut points over 16. This breast cancer screening. What you'll know on the, as you go, it's like 5-star went from 84 and 83 or down to like, you see the block in time. There was a year where HEDIS was not collected because of COVID, and then 2022 actually represents the 2020 worst year of COVID. So you see mammograms went way down, right? So then the cut points went down. People had less access. They actually pursued less preventive services because they're at home. They didn't have appointments. They couldn't get services. And so that delayed care, right? And now it's increasing. So what I want you to think about when you're looking at last year's cut points, last year's 5-star was at 82. So if you get an 82, do you predict, hey, I'm a 5-star now? Or do you think, okay, well, historically, breast cancer screening 5-star was 83, 84. Maybe I need to think about the fact that I should be increasing that. Now, I don't need to make it 90. It's never been even close to 90. So you can have a reasonable goal to say, I'm not going to say everything has to be at 100%, so I just waste all my money on one measure over another. You can use reasonable guidance to say, okay, maybe I need to increase it. And that is the level of risk you want to take. And I recommend your organization graph cut points the decisions you're predicting, meet with measure owners so they can actually visualize how those cut points nationally are changing, why they're working towards a bigger number. It will even help providers understand, hey, we're not holding you accountable to anything that other plans aren't already doing. And then I note in the red here at the bottom is guardrails were applied to the bottoms, met the 2-star cut point. So the 53 should be a 58. So next year is very likely another, the maximum guardrail will allow the cut point for stars 26 to be 58. So when you're projecting your score, it's like, okay, if I'm 58, I'm feeling pretty good, I'm going to get a 2-star. If I'm 57, I'm going to think it's not likely. So you use history to better understand your evaluation, and you can make some better risk adjustments, but you can move some things depending on what you see. Here's medication adherence. The way the graph is, I did 30% to 100% for all of them. It feels crunched. Now, if you're, if you look at the last 2 years, 4-star cut point, it was 88 down to 87. Like small variations hurt you if you're predicting and working towards that one percentage. So if you say, I expect cut points to be 88, or let's say last year 5-star was 90, and you say, oh, I got to 90, I'm a 5-star, and then it bumps up and you're like, oh no, I missed it, I'm actually a 4. You do have to put in room for flexibility of score and say, we have to assume people are improving. But at the same time, like if you look at 7, 8, 10 years of data, and you could go back in time, it's not like you can't see the range of performance and expectation people have. And that way you can better understand, like, well, this is the ballpark, but to know that it's going to be exactly 80 or 81 or 52, like that is not going to happen. And we do too much of that math where we're like, okay, we hit a cut point, we know we got it. And our responsibility as STARS leaders is to better be flexible on that. Yeah, let's see here. Oh, I thought I got that. Okay, here's statin for therapy. It's similar ratings. You can look at the scores. They're adjustable. They're improving. Here's a score that went from 89 to 90 to 92. So here's where we see a positive trend. We need to think, okay, everyone's working towards this. This is fairly new measure. I need to keep working hard, and 92 is no longer going to cut it for 5-star. I have to assume it's going to go up another 2-3 points because of the trend that it had from before. And this is a PO's measure. Again, these are a measure where guardrails really pulled down the 2- and 3-star cut points. But globally, you could see where it ranges. You see a lot of historical ranges of 2- and 3-star cut points. Tukey is supposed to stop that variability and create more stability. But unfortunately, it's going to raise the cut point and then lock it into that area. Not lock it in, but be similar in that area. Cynthia, talk about new measures and how that might affect plans.
Yeah. So as we know, CMS is always adding and deleting measures. So let's talk about how you can predict how your new measures are going to perform. So new measures do not have guardrails applied for the first 3 years in the program, but new measures do tend to improve significantly during those first 2 to 3 years as plans really start to focus on them. And also those performances the increases are not tempered by the guardrails. So looking at this is MRP, using MRP, medication reconciliation as an example. It has changed. So starting in when it was first new, 2018, 19, and 20, you see that in the first year, a 2-star was 19%, but then 2 years later, that 2-star is almost 50%. And then you have to expect, as Dwight talked about, that the industry is going to improve, particularly on new measures, because everyone wakes up and says, oh, wow, this measure is now part of STAR ratings. We got to implement some interventions. Hopefully you're doing it a little before they're in STAR ratings. But if we only use the most current cut points as goals, particularly with these new measures, you're potentially significantly under predicting where you should be. Let's use a more real-time example of COB, or concurrent use of opioids and benzodiazepines, which is one of the new measures that will be part of STAR year 27, but the measurement year is here in 25. Remember, lower is better for this measure. So this is an actual distribution of the last year's results in display. So, you know, the display tables are available for at least the last 2 years for every measure. You can track and evaluate your ranking based off those. CMS doesn't tell us what the cut points are for these display measures. So you have to extrapolate into percentages and then determine what you think those cut points and goals are going to be to help you set your goals. At the very least, you need to use those display data as a way of setting yourself up for some analysis and understanding how you rank so that you can set your goals appropriately. And then we also have a great example of the HOS measure that is now coming back onto the 2026 STARS, maintaining and improving mental health. You know, first we want to let show you that there's a big difference between national percentiles and cut points, and we've graphed that here. The last star rating cut points we have are here on the left, and we've graphed out also the display data from this year's measure from the results of all the plans last year, actually, I should say. We have prediction of cut points using that display data on the right for this mental health measure. And you can see, though, that the national percentiles have skyrocketed. So your 85% 5-star, which we had back in 2021, is not going to cut it for this year. It's probably going to be closer to 89 or 90% based off of the percentiles and the display data.
We'll see how well we can predict.
We will
Thanks,
see.
Cynthia. But that's excellent. I mean, I think it's the point of the idea that there's plenty of data to actually examine your scores on new measures, even if you don't have exact cut points, and that will help you with goal setting. Thinking of goal setting, a good point to take here is that first and foremost, I don't know how many times I connect with health plans and they're like, we don't know what the future is. We don't want to predict. We just use last published cut points. And I just want you to think about what that means from the standpoint of like, the cut points get released every fall, right? So 2025 measurement year, if you use the last published cut points from a year ago, that's comparing yourself to measure year 2023, 2 years ago. And you have to expect that over 2 years, do you expect plans to do exactly the same, or do you expect them to improve? And from a goal setting standpoint, whether you want to predict cut points or not, you have to expect and bake in an industry focused effort to improve on measures, right? Everyone wants to do well on STARS. They're putting forth interventions, they're strategizing, they're evaluating the performance, they're frustrated by Tukey or whatever. So they're putting interventions in just like you. And so you have to assume that everyone's working towards improvement. So that should likely happen. So if you set targets and goals or cut points based on 2 years ago, you're not giving yourself enough of an expectation that you need to keep along the spectrum of how plans are improving. You know, there are a million ways plans do cut point predictions. I'll just say you're going to start with historical trends like I showed you. You do think, trending analysis is one way. We also look at like what's happening in the markets. The year COVID hit, we kept hearing like members can't get radiology appointments. They're not getting mammograms. So we could see it was dropping. You might see all of a sudden there's like a huge flu season in November and members can't get appointments. It's only for urgent care. There's more hospitalization. So my readmission rate goes up. Like you're going to see shifts in things that in clinical outcomes, but also what you hear in the market or what you read financially, right? So now we have AI, we have new tools, new strategies, interventions, better predictions. So plans are doing a lot of new investments and new creative solutioning that never existed that could actually raise their scores. So when you're like mapping out what you think a cut point is or what your goal is for 4-star or 5-star for a measure, you gotta think about those things and bake it in. And there's many ways to do this. I would just recommend you start with what the baseline was, last year's score. You bake in an improvement. But just assume like if a stable measure goes up, everyone goes up a point. Measure that's trending up every year, give it a 2 or 3 points higher. A measure that's declining, don't decline this goal. Don't give yourself a lower goal. Just at least keep it the same with no change. And then new measures, I would, just like Cynthia showed with the MRP, expect whatever it was in the first year, expect a large improvement over the first few years. There's no guardrails. Plans tend to finally wake up and go, oh my God, I got to invest in this measure. Now I'm going to do some interventions that they didn't do before. So you do see a large lift. So you're going to want to put that into your targets. And then maybe you have market intelligence and focus. You know, if you can work with your vendors, your other analytical vendors, your STARS dashboard vendors, they can help give you data on their clients, on their projections. Some of the cut points I have here, I worked with Lilac Software to do actual scientific replication of what CMS calculates based on display data. It's never perfect because CMS has a few tricks behind the curtain, but it does give you very clear guidance to where you want to be. And I think that's really helpful to work with all of these entities to cross compare. As a consultant, I work with multiple clients. We'll compare our goal. I'll say, here's what my targets are. And the client will say, I want it to be higher, or I think it's a little lower. And we talk about why that's different and what we think those predictions are like. But again, we are making future predictions, but the goal is to give you an objective target that you can then evaluate yourself on and give yourself room to grow. And before I end on that, I would note a couple of things. Plans, from my perspective, when I evaluate them, tend to be overly optimistic. So what'll happen is if they're thinking they're going to be in 85 and they're not sure if the cut point will be 84, 85, or 86, they'll make it 85 because they'll give themselves like, oh, I think it's going to be 85. I think we're going to do well. Like, we've improved from 84. Like, I would be careful to like separate yourself out from the cut point predictions from where you are. Like, do an evaluation of where you think you need to be and are you meeting that? But if you don't meet it, you can't just say, well, we don't know what cut points are, so I'm going to give myself that 4. I see that often, and you'd be surprised. So make sure you're really being conservative in your assessment and the like. And the next part of that is, I really think you have to do multiple variables and change your predictions, change it in analysis. So, hey, you might have a high level prediction, a low level prediction. You might have a most likely, or you might have 5 different variations. Like if CAPS does well, we get a 4. And you map out and model that, because then you're making better decisions about where you're going to invest your time and money. So if you have a higher risk, like I did 3 different variations of these themes, and 4 out of the 5 times or whatever, I'm going to get 3, 5, and I will be 4. If you can build those models, you're going to do a better job. I think we're over. One thing I'll just say is set a minimum. Here's another point. 2 points I'd like to make above goal if you stay with me. Instead of setting your targets as your minimum threshold, so if you think 4-star is an 85 and 5-star is 90, do not set your 4-star threshold at 85 and tell your providers and your staff, we got to get to 85 for 4-star. And when you get to 85, you say, woohoo, set it at the midpoint, make it 87. I guarantee you, if you targeted midpoints of cut points instead of the minimum point to get to that next threshold, you'll get to where you need to go. You'll have a preponderance of success. You'll never be perfect in cut point predictions, but then at least you're targeting a level of risk, avoiding the risk by going for a midpoint of a range and not the midpoint. And everybody does. It's like, I set a target for a cut point. I need to be a 4-star, so that's not have to reach. And that's the worst. Like you're putting it at the skin of the teeth. Like you're not make it. And if you say, oh, I'm going to add 2 points to even the projected number I have to reach to get a 4-star, you see the room you're giving yourself. So project cut points, then project where you need to be as a goal. And that's something different. And then finally, I do want to make this point with provider targets. If you are working with providers with value-based care incentive programs, you always have a group of providers that are a very small number of members. You don't influence, won't answer your phone call, etc. And if your providers that you're influencing are incentivized to hit that minimum threshold again, they're not going to make up the gap that happens with the other providers you have no influence over. So unfortunately, I know they hate those targets already. If you want someone to be a 5-star, you kind of have to, need your value-based care providers to be a 5.5, which doesn't exist, but conceptually to make up for the providers that are 4-star. Right. So mathematically, I have an example here, but it doesn't matter. Like, plans don't do this. Say say, okay, the minimum threshold for 4-star, we're going to give you a bonus to hit that. And the provider's like, oh, I got my 85%, I get my bonus. You need them to be at 90 because for every provider that's at 73% or 68%, like you're missing your target. Any key takeaways, Cynthia, that you think we should end on?
No, I think you really pointed out how volatile these cut points can be, and it's making stars more difficult, and making sure that the predictions that each plan is doing tries to keep up with that industry movement using all of the methodologies you talked about.
Yeah, I would just say avoid the traps of under predicting where you need to be and then being surprised that you're always just on the cusp of where you need to be star rating. And with everyone improving, struggling to get out of 4, those targets and goals really help drive you where you're going to invest better. So thank you for joining. This is the 5th session of a 5-point series. You can go to YouTube to see the recordings. If you've signed up for this, you'll get notice for the recording directly on Teams. But if